Hey everybody, thanks so much. Welcome back to the second now episode of Cockpit Counsel. My name is Tim. I'm Chief Legal Officer at Link Squares, and today with me is Andy Dale. Andy is the GC and Chief Privacy Officer at Alice, which is a B2B gifting platform startup here in Boston. Andy, welcome to the show.
Hey Tim, how are you?
Doing well, doing well. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I've been a GC at this point at three tech startups in Boston. Prior to that, I was on the legal team at TD Ameritrade for 5 years and a law firm before that, and then I worked at ESPN before that. But as we say at Alice, my 5 to 9 is that I'm a dad and a tennis player and a cook, and like a bottle of wine, and that's a little bit of an overview.
It's awesome. So I'm just going with the general assumption that, of course, the law firm was your favorite job, right?
Well, I worked at a law firm in law school, the second 2 years of law school, and actually had a really good experience with a series of great mentors and great partners that were litigators. And I didn't end up being a litigator, but it showed me the value of having really great teachers at that point in your career. And then I went and clerked for a judge who was another great mentor. And then I went into a law firm and it was really terrible. It was a terrible experience with a very difficult person who didn't train me very well. And when I got the opportunity to make that change and get in-house, I went in and I remember doing a project, one of the first times doing a project, and my boss at the time saying, like, "Thank you, great job," and I just didn't even know know what to do with that.
Yeah, that's one of the common stories. I've been fortunate enough to never have to work at a law firm my entire career, so it's been great.
They're not all bad. It's not all bad, and I know, I have a good friend who was in-house for a while and then went back into private practice, and I used to mess with him and joke, "How did you do that? How could you do that?" And he always said to me, he has now the ability to work with the team that he wants. He, has a firm that's really supportive. And so, like, there's a lot of, I don't want to bash all law firms because there are plenty of firms uh, that allow you to be yourself, work how you want to work with clients that you like, and work with the team that you like. So it's not all bad. I just happen to have a difficult experience myself.
Well, it seems like you found yourself at an outstanding spot right now, and as one of the coolest things that I love is following you on LinkedIn and seeing a lot of your posts about your podcast. Tell us a little bit about your podcast, how that started, and obviously you have a ton of fun with it. It's just awesome.
It's so fun. Thanks. It's been one of the most fun things to do. And during COVID, it allowed me to spend a lot of time with my good friend Pedro, who runs ad policy at Facebook now, and he was at Salesforce and Oracle before that, and allows us to get together and really just rap with really smart, interesting, fun people with kind of a loose 80s vibe. We keep it really light and fun, and the best thing about it was it's just so fully supported by Alice. One of the big reasons I joined when I met our founder, CEO Greg, was we really bonded over privacy, and he really forward thinking in that respect and understood and got that I'm not just hiring a GC. I'm hiring somebody that can bring some product counseling to the table, can bring some privacy, not just privacy compliance, but like looking around the corner at what's going to be important. If you're in a personal gifting business and you're going to process a lot of personal data, we were really aligned that way. And so when I got in, the discussion about how to put any content out there about that, because my friend Jeff Mace, who runs data science here, always says privacy is a feature. It's a feature of Alice. So the marketing team and I brainstormed, and we leaned in and we created. And Pedro and I have been talking about doing something for a while, so it's been really, really fun to do.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Where can people find it?
Well, it's on everywhere you get podcasts, so Apple, Spotify, places like that. It's on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, and you can also Google it and just get to there's a page that hangs off of the Alice page, a landing page there too, with all the video episodes too. It's on video and podcast. It's been really fun.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, obviously being in the privacy space, like let's dig into that a little bit. What are some of the major trends you're seeing in the privacy space, and maybe some predictions for things to come?
I mean, it's interesting, Tim. Like, I don't know how the experience was for you. I'd be interested to know like what it was like at DraftKings and before for you, because I fell into it, backwards really. I was at TD Ameritrade and I was really early in my career, commercial contracts guy, doing deals um, and working with some of our more innovative teams on kind of the tech team that was really focused on building different parts of the platform. And data naturally started to come up, and I started to work. I happened to luckily be next door to our chief privacy officer, and he was the first person I ever met that had any certifications or had any knowledge. And at that time, it was really just about financial data. It wasn't necessarily about the depth and the breadth of data that we think about now. So like back then, it was me just kind of tapping his intellect, and he then became my boss. 2.5 years later, I started working for him, still doing some of the commercial work, but also then expanding into, as Ameritrade scaled with privacy and data, I was able to do that. So it was just really, I fell into it. It was organic. It was interesting to me. And then when I went to leave and moved to Boston, I told him I'm joining an ad tech company, and I had helped Ameritrade buy a license to a company called BlueKai, which was a data management platform, to start managing all of their browser cookies and start kind of doing digital advertising. That
Right.
got bought by Oracle eventually. And that's actually how I met Pedro. But ultimately, he ended up saying to me, "You're going to have a ton of privacy issues there." And I paused and I said, like, "What are you talking about? It's just browser cookies." And he was like, "You'll see, you'll see." And like, sure enough, the first day I got there, I sat down with the CEO of DataZoo, and I said to him, like, what in your mind, other than the obvious things, like what's really important and to
Right.
focus on? And he was like, privacy right away. It's going to be huge. It's going to be impactful in ad tech and other industries, um, and so from there, I just kind of like took that guidance and ran with it, and I got a ton of support from our CFO, Rich, who was great about backing me and getting certified and knew that it would help the business. And just from there, it kind of just took off, and it started just becoming table stakes for the businesses that I was working on, not just, as Jeff says, a feature, not just a thing we had to deal with.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was definitely an interesting area of focus for us at DraftKings. I mean, obviously, just given that business model, tons of payment card information, and going through the PCI compliance stuff and ISO 27001. Like, there's sort of that end of it, but then first the GDPR was sort of making things a little bit more broad, and then trying to figure out how to manage things, particularly in working with like commercial vendors and things like that. Once the CCPA came out, I mean, we were fortunate enough to not have at the time, we didn't really have a massive footprint in Europe, and the bulk of our customers were all located in the United States. And so, but once the CCPA hit, it was absolutely one of those, like, okay, we have to start building out a team and paying attention to this. And so, yeah, we started to build out a division of the compliance function to manage that stuff. So, and now it's interesting as I think about, you know, like if I had to make a prediction on what's going to happen from a regulatory standpoint with privacy, it's probably not going to be all that different than what we saw with fantasy sports regs, where it's going to be this patchwork of states, and sort of somebody's going to do one thing that another state didn't do, and like everyone's going to add that thing whether it makes sense or it doesn't.
If
And that's
you look at how companies are preceding now, you had the GDPR happen, and then you had the CCPA happen, and inevitably we all knew, people that have been doing this knew this was going to happen, which is I'm going to take my GDPR, DPA, and data privacy agreement, and I'm going to mash CCPA into it, and I'm going to send it to everybody. And so then even if you're not processing European data, you're sitting there looking at the GDPR as the floor, kind of anyway, and you're making those contractual commitments in the agreement. We had this discussion on my team very recently. We have a small footprint in Europe, but with respect to certain rules of the GDPR, we've contractually committed to those. So
Right.
if we change a key, for example, if we decide to change a key sub-processor that's going to process personal information, I should tell all my customers that I'm doing that. And if they object, I need to hear that objection out, even if I'm not processing EU data and the GDPR says I have to do that, but the CCPA doesn't say I have to do that. But what are you going to do? You gotta listen, and you gotta apply these things the best way you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting coming at it from from the perspective of an in-house attorney, and as you think about the role of in-house counsel, and we can talk about this in terms of privacy or just generally speaking, like how are you seeing that evolve over time? And it sounds like you've had some pretty forward-thinking executives that have brought you on. I also have throughout my career had some people who recognized that their first in-house counsel wasn't there to just solve a problem. There was more to it than that. But interested in hearing your take on sort of how the role has evolved throughout your career and where you see it going.
Super lucky about what you just said to have the support of those people, particularly starting with that CPO at Ameritrade. But then when I kind of went off on my own, the CEO at DataXu was a lawyer, so a lapsed lawyer, but he already inherently knew kind of and understood the positions that I would be put in. That was helpful. Some people maybe would have found that less helpful because he would wade in a lot. But I think
Right.
once we establish trust with each other, and on the privacy realm, I quickly exceeded what he was doing. So we had a good back and forth on that stuff, and he was a mentor in that sense and very forward thinking about those kinds of things. And then when we established trust, and then we built on it. And then at the company that followed, our CEO very quickly understood the importance of privacy to the board and customers, and very quickly understood that we were able to, from a legal perspective, capture through it was loyalty program software, but he understood the key legal issue that we could acquire opt-in consent for our users through a loyalty program and then do stuff with the data to improve their experience. So he quickly understood and then was very supportive on the things that mattered related to that. And like I said with Alice, Greg and I leaned into those conversations right away. That was very much we need to tackle this from a product level. And so, I think having the support of the executives on your team, having the support of privacy champions within the business as well. But I think the main thing that I've learned and picked up is that what's incumbent upon me or the GC or the legal team in general is to start early setting what the culture is going to be around legal in the business. Are we off in a corner saying no? Are we available on Slack all the time at weird hours? What's the balance? Are we trying to get to yes? Are we trying to close deals? Are we, you and I both work in sales focused businesses, and so are we doing our best to not be the gate or the barrier to sales, instead being a true partner to sales? And because that relationship can be fraught if you don't get that culture right. So to me, setting that culture, that allows you to get privacy and legal champions in the business across product and engineering and other and marketing in particular has a big privacy touch point and legal touch point as well. So the big one for me is culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And going a little bit along that is I've tried to, as the leader of the legal teams, tried to dictate sort of where I stand in terms of risk tolerance. You know,
Yeah.
and it's interesting because in the privacy space, that really is an area where now you have people coming in and saying, I need full indemnification without limits, caps, etc. for even, you know, the minorest whatever that may happen, or even a situation that says, you know, let's say AWS, something happens with AWS, right? And it's something massive, like, you know, the setting up that risk appetite can really help you get through some of those conversations, I think, a little bit better. And you know, and for us, it's a lot of having confidence in your tech stack, but also being prudent with the way that you're that you're working with, you know, the other party, your customer, to
How
really.
how have you managed that trend? I'd be interested to know from you, like, how have you managed that trend of, uh, you know, we both work in SaaS businesses, right? So how have you managed the trend of, well, you're processing my data, so because it is quickly becoming, in my view, the thing they ask for on Capped. It used to be like just confidentiality or just like
Right.
willful misconduct or something. Now it's definitely privacy, and so how have you managed that ask? Because you know, you and I, again, we're in this, we're not selling $1 million deals necessarily, it's smaller deals.
Yeah, there are a couple of things. I mean, sometimes, if we're really going to get into a drawn out negotiation, I look at indemnification and limitation of liability together, and I'll try to discuss them together with, you know, with the potential customer. And basically, if we're looking at, you know, exclusions of categories of damages, inevitably everyone's like, oh, a data breach, you have to accept that along with your IP provisions, along with your confidentiality provisions. And realistically, if you think about what a limitation of liability is meant to do, it's meant to allow for categories of damages where direct damages are not readily apparent or calculable, right? And so when you think about a lot of these data protection laws that actually do have statutory damages associated with them, your direct damages are your damages. And so in those circumstances, your lost profits are not something that I'm really interested in trying to cover you for. Like, I'm absolutely going to try to pull those out, any of
Right.
your consequential indirect damages. And, you know, same thing, like, it should be relatively calculable from an indemnification perspective to understand what your liability is going to be. How many people do you have whose information you're putting in my hands, right? Or
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
guess, you know, and accept it. So it's like, but the other side of that coin is, all right, well, how many people do they really have that they're giving us? So even if it happens, who cares?
I
That.
like your approach. I like your approach. It's interesting. You take this more like, there's many ways to approach these types of negotiations, and one is a more methodical approach, like you mentioned, and the other one can be sort of, well, I'm going to take responsibility for the things that are within my control, but we're in a world of changing laws constantly. You just alluded to the state laws, right? Like, I don't
Right.
know what's coming next, you know, and I'm so it has to be calculable against the revenue that I'm getting. So it has to be like, there has to be like a measure of relationship between those. I'm not giving you uncapped liability or $20 million in liability for a 25K 1 year deal. Like, I can't do that.
Right.
And I
Right.
think people on the side understand, they like, more and more, I think people are understanding that, and we can get to a yes on that. But I like that there's different approaches. And what it did make me think of one more thing that I was curious about. Like, do you cap IP infringement? And this came
Uh,
up from, like, this is personal, I have a personal story about it after, but it's interesting.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, we'll do it in terms of like an overall liability cap and in the limitation of liability, but you know, excluding, of course, your gross negligence, intentional, right, all of the things that otherwise wouldn't be enforceable anyway.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely do. Yeah.
Really interesting, right? Because you and I came up in the same generation of this, where in our past lives that was always uncapped. It was like,
Yeah.
okay, if you have an IP infringement claim and you're the customer, you're like, well, okay, you cover that. I don't have anything to do with that. But when you're a SaaS provider, you're like, I'm not building something into your code. I'm not like, there's no risk there for you. And so when we sold SessionM to MasterCard, we had a bunch of deals that had uncapped liability in it for IP infringement claims, and they were sort of like, it wasn't a sticking point, but it definitely came up. It was like, why do you have all these? And this is why do you have all these uncapped provisions? And
Right.
it just dawned on me, I think that the world has changed around that provision in the last 5 or 6 years, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. I earlier in my career there was I've argued the other side of it too, right? It needs to be right. um, you know,
It's harder and harder to argue it, in my view, when the system is less and less critical. Um,
yeah,
maybe LinkSquares has a higher burden than maybe a marketing software like ours, because it might be viewed as mission critical to somebody to get to their contracts, or their SLA around that. Maybe they may push a little more on what they want from an availability perspective, like if they have a big legal team and that team can't work or something.
right. And obviously the type of business is something else too. Like cap on IP infringement in a B2C environment is very different than a B2B environment, right? And if you're talking about a brand, which is your primary IP versus your awesome cutting edge software that no one can figure out how it does what it does, that's like those are two very, very different things to be defending against or
That's
thinking
right.
about.
Like the aperture of exposure in a B2C business is just very different.
That's exactly right. It's exactly right. So wanted to touch a little bit more on any sort of other aspects of your career, any proud moments or any advice that you'd love to give to other in-house attorneys, whether they're starting out or whether they're about to be in a negotiation with you in upcoming months?
uh, Proud moment for sure was, well, so honestly, any of the venture financings that I've worked on where we get the fuel the business needs to go forward, that always feels good, and those are always um, challenging for different reasons, but you find really good outside counsel to partner with, and if it's nice because it feels like a team win. It feels like you got your outside partner, you've got your inside folks, all the team from finance to other parts of the business working together. That always feels really good. Something you can empathize with. An exit is always a huge event, and
Yep,
the SETM MasterCard deal was a great event. Um, like excellent for difficult and hard to get through, but that celebratory moment when it takes me back to team sports in high school. It feels
that's
that
right.
that feel of that the hugs at the end, the drinks, the celebratory drinks at the end, like all that. Um, it's we're definitely missing some of that now, being so remote and separate from people.
Yeah,
Um, so those things are huge. And the other couple things that came to my mind in terms of what feels good and feels successful is again another thing that you can relate to, which is building teams and having the fortunate position to be able to hire great people, see them succeed. I've got a few
yep.
people that have worked with me and that I hired that are GCs now, and
Awesome.
huge, like trying to
Yeah,
build like Belichick coaching tree of uh, successful, nice, relatable human GCs, in the community is hugely pride inducing when you see people succeed like that.
absolutely it is. And put an exclamation point on the extra effort that it often takes to mentor and develop attorneys in-house. I mean, there's nothing better than seeing people really learn that what is a very different practice
Yeah.
than being at a firm or even government. Um, we're going to start taking questions from the crowds, but on the personal side, you know, part of the theme here is that, you know, I'm a pilot. I love to fly airplanes, and I have some pre-flight rituals that I do, not only just when I'm flying myself, but also um, when I'm going on commercial flights. One of which is I absolutely love to load up on the commercial flight the predicted route into my ForeFlight app on my iPad and just sort of see where we're going to go and see if they'll track it or change it. But wanted to know, do you have a pre-flight ritual that you, whether it's a snack, drink, meal, anything like that?
I thought you were gonna say you pray before every
Well, and pre-COVID, when I was going back and forth to Vegas a lot with DraftKings, my wife and I would always meet for dinner before I grabbed the 9 p.m. flight out. So, but yeah, uh, interested in seeing what if anything you got.
I think my pre pre-flight ritual. I mean, it's been a while since I've flown, to be honest, but you know, typically when I'm on a work trip and I've worked really hard on something, you know, I'll just I'll take that opportunity to watch a movie. And I know that sounds sort of like silly, but like, and I used to crank on flights all the time and just like crank work the whole time. And I just started trying, you know, to just not do that and to watch something that fed my soul a little bit. And I recall a flight to flying to Chicago, and I put on one of those Fast and Furious movies. Like, you don't have to think about it whatsoever. And and I remember just at one point, like in the movie, one of the cars flew out of a building and landed in, like crushed and landed in another building. And I remember audibly going like, "Holy shit!" Like on the airplane. So, you know, just doing my best
That's
to relax, to try to relax.
exactly. That's awesome. That's awesome. And it looks like we've got time for one of the questions here. Your podcast. What's been your favorite episode so far, and what's your recommendation for a new listener? What's the go-to to
Uh,
get them?
uh, so we've done 3 seasons. I'll try to think of one from each. Julia Schulman, the guest, is the GC of Triple Lift, Link Square's customer.
Yep,
Um, really good friend of mine, and great episode. She dresses up in 80s garb. She's an
that's awesome.
incredible GC, incredible chief privacy officer, incredibly insightful, great, hilarious episode. So that's a good one. Season 2, one of my favorite outside counsels, Gary Keibel, is a partner at Davis and Gilbert. He talks all about his background as an IT guy and how he learned technology, which I always thought was super interesting that makes him a really good tech lawyer, you know, from actually, you don't see that every day. You don't see a tech lawyer that actually understands tech.
Right,
They've
right.
learned it maybe, but they've never done it. So the Gary Keibel episode of season 2 is great. And then maybe like see the third season, probably the last episode we did, we had Kristen Sverchek, the GC of Lyft, was the last episode of that season. That was a fantastic episode touching on a ton of things around like AI, autonomous vehicles, privacy, bringing your whole self to work. Like Kristen is an incredibly versatile GC. She's been at Lyft through every sort of change you can possibly see. So we just try to get a really good variety of guests on there, and we just have a ton of fun and laugh a lot.
That's awesome. Andy, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate taking the time. I know you and the team at Alice are super busy these days, so really appreciate it.
Like,
And thank you again, and looking forward to catching up soon.
yep. Thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Yep.